This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, excited to bring you a new episode of Dune Talk. Glad to have you join us again this week. Or if you're stopping by for the first time, welcome. You found the official news, the official show of DuneNewsNet.com, where we cover everything Dune. Of course, there's a lot going on with the movies, and we also cover all the news relating to books, comics, games, and the upcoming TV shows. Well, it's happening. Production on Dune Part 2 is fully underway. We're looking forward to discuss all the latest movie news and what we have to look forward to later this year. Plus, we have a couple of quick expanded Dune updates with another game announced and some just released retro-style collectibles toys transporting us back to the 80s. This is Marcus, your editor at Dune Newsnet, and I'm here together with two of the other Dune Talk crew members.
Hey everybody, good to be with you today. This is Garin, and I'm just glad that production for Part 2 is underway. So I know this is a necessary part of creating the next step in this story, and I'm just excited to watch all the news come through.
Hey everyone, this is Johnny Sobchak again as well. Definitely echo those sentiments, Garin. Super excited to be in the next chapter, I suppose, of the story for these films. And that's the one thing I feel like I have to keep reminding myself is I just can't wait to see it, or I can't wait for the first trailer, the first like look at the characters. But I know it's like you got to just enjoy the ride. So I'm excited to talk about some more details that we've gotten recently. And also shout out to Simon, of course, who, as I'm sure Marcus is about to mention, is not here today. We miss our Dune companion over there, to use Garin's moniker.
Yeah, we're missing Simon this week, but yeah, we're hoping he'll be back for the next episode.
Dune movie news.
So last time on Dune Talk, we discussed the first shooting in Italy with Florence Pugh as Princess Irulan, and that took place in early July. Since then, the status of Dune Part 2 has officially changed to in production. And on July 18, we got that anticipated photograph of the clapperboard for the second movie, together with that flurry of activity from on social media from the studios and the actors' accounts. So remember, it was previously reported that in the industry trades that Dune Part 2 was on track to start full-on production on July 22, with the bulk of the cast and crew set to reunite in Budapest, Hungary. And indeed, leading up to that date, we got confirmation that director Denis Villeneuve is in the city. And then one by one, we started to get the photographs from different cast members who have been arriving. So we got some video of Austin Butler. We've seen Rebecca Ferguson posting on Instagram. Leah Seydoux is there. And most recently, we got a shot of Timothe Chalamet eating in one of the local restaurants. And there's been some reports that Zendaya has been sighted. Haven't seen any photos yet. But yeah, it seems pretty much that all the stars are gathering there at the moment. So Johnny, what's been most exciting for you from these past weeks of reports?
Yeah, so I would say I was really happy just to see that the social media pages for the movie like took the opportunity to like make an official announcement and not leave things kind of in the dark, or like not like totally clear if they are in production, if they're not. And it came along with the press release as well that we got a little bit more details on, which I'm sure we'll probably go into in a minute. But the picture of the clapperboard, very simple, nothing that gives anything away, no big set or costumes or anything. But I noticed, I feel like, I don't know if anyone mentioned this or if it was just so obvious and I just didn't realize it till later, but I noticed the clapperboard, it's actually laying in actual sand in whatever, it must be a set in Budapest, I suspect, but I thought that was pretty cool. And I also like the little "Long Live the Fighters" slogan thrown in there, just tiny font. Who knows if that'll be something that appears in the actual film or not, but I thought that was a really cool touch. And it was just nice to see. And not only was it nice to just have the film, the social media pages acknowledge that they started filming, but the response, I feel like online, I feel like Dune was trending for like a solid day or two. The tweet blew up. It has like nearly 100,000 likes and like 20,000 retweets. And so, and I tweeted, it's a pretty impressive comparison to the expectation of the conversation around the film prior to release, or at least especially when Part 1 was getting ready to film. It was like everyone was just of the mind that this is some doomed project that is just not, maybe it'll be good. Villeneuve doesn't disappoint, but maybe it wouldn't get the acclaim or the attention that it deserves. And thankfully that the opposite happened, I would say. And now everyone seems to be on the Dune train, riding the worm and ready for to see more of what part 2 is going to be about. I think it's really going to be quite an awesome hit, and I'm excited to see now that things are moving and social media pages are involved and whatnot. I'm excited to see like how they do their first looks at the new characters, and I'm already thinking to next year, next summer, the first posters and the trailer and things like that. That's pretty fun next 12 months or so.
Yeah, I really kind of liked seeing and feeling the uptick in excitement with that clapperboard post, and I was really excited to see everyone joining in. I also noticed, I'm sure, I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but I noticed for Prime Day that the Dune Part 1 movie went on sale for $7.99, and then shortly thereafter, Apple did the same thing on their movie purchase site. And so I'd like to believe in my fan world that, once people start seeing and feeling and hearing the buzz, it's like, okay, I'm going to go see this now for the 9th time. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to get back into that mode and that feeling. And of course, I watched it again the other day, and it's just exciting to know that I'm going to get to see what happens. I mean, I've recently read that second book in the Dune novel, the first Dune novel, and tried to kind of imagine, what's coming. And I think it's going to be more than what I think, because there's not as much there that Frank Herbert has written, but there's a lot that you could do to depict a lot of the things that he talks about in that last third of the book that's going to be the movie Part 2. So I don't know, I kind of got all back into it again. I mean, I'm always kind of in the excitement of Dune, but it kind of raised a few levels after seeing some of the posts on Twitter, and then knowing that they're actually there. In fact, I often think about it throughout the day. I'm like, I wonder what they're doing. I know there's a big time difference. It's like 8 hours difference, but it's like, hey, I wonder what they're doing. What scene are they shooting, or what are they practicing for? And I know that Austin Butler's there, and obviously there's going to be that that climactic scene from the book, and I'm sure they're preparing their fighting choreography and training and being in tip-top shape. And so I don't know, my mind is just now all around what's happening, which I wasn't really able to do in 2018 when they were shooting Part 1, right? Because I didn't really have a lot of context. I didn't really have, the world hadn't been laid out for me yet. And so I was just trying my best to sort of imagine, how is Villeneuve going to create this story, and now I know, so my imagination's kind of trying to fit in that world view that he's created. So it's just been fun the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, because now that we've gotten to know more of the cast and crew, and for example, we know that Roger Yuan, who's the fight coordinator, he was also in Budapest. So I can imagine, he's like working with Austin Butler on those knife fighting skills, getting ready for his potentially 2 major duels in the movie, or potentially more fighting. We don't know, but yeah, at least those two duels will probably be like some really impressive scenes in the movie.
Villeneuve established, with the Gurney Paul training scene, right, that there can be some pretty intensive and very high quality sword fighting, right? That was very well established. And then obviously the battles between Sardaukar and Atreides troops. But I'd like to believe that Villeneuve is going to actually even create kind of the iconic intensive focus in sword fighting, because some people sort of like to describe Dune as science fiction, but also kind of fantasy at the same time, right? Because it's not like we have laser guns blasting all around us like Star Wars, right? Because of shields and the interaction between laser guns and shields. So I can kind of imagine or envision that maybe there's going to be, like you said, Marcus, maybe a lot more one-on-one dueling or sword fighting than maybe is depicted or described in the book, just because Feyd is this incredibly gifted and skilled fighter in the ring, at sword fighting, and he's killed hundreds or thousands of opponents. So, you could do a lot with that to create the feeling that Feyd is this ruthless opponent that does Paul even stand a chance, you know? So there's a lot you can do.
Yeah, Garin, real quick to your point, I think that, yeah, that's going to be a pretty big element of part two. And I'm really excited to see what Roger Yuan and Villeneuve and their crew kind of come up with that for that. And also just thinking about, because as Marcus was saying, the stars are kind of aligning in Budapest, and who knows, as you were saying, kind of what they could be filming on any given day. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities. Even the sand, that sand with the clapperboard photo that I saw, I could just imagine maybe that's the sand in the arena when Feyd is killing. I would imagine that would be interesting, especially sometimes. I know obviously films, television projects, they're always shot out of order. They're never chronological. But a lot of times early on, they will film like bigger set pieces, or like if it's the beginning of the movie, potentially they may want to knock that out first. And I think that would be interesting to think that maybe they are already kind of moving that direction, or filming, or at least rehearsing some of those things. And as far as like the other newcomers, I don't know if either of you saw, but I did a poll with some of the four major new additions, and I asked, who are you most excited to see, like as far as their performance. And 1,100 people voted on it, and Austin Butler was of course number one.
Yeah.
And I feel pretty similar. I mean, I really love the idea of Walken as the Emperor, and I'm really excited to see that. But I think off the heels of Elvis and how much I was blown away by Austin Butler in that role, and now knowing that he's going to play this like kind of sinister, like Feyd is such an interesting character. I'm sure we could go on all day about all the different things that they could do with that, but knowing Butler's going to be playing a role like that, I think there's just a lot of fun to be had there. Not only in his performance, but the appearance of the character and the action scenes we've been talking about, or the duels. So I could see why. I think people are really, I think Austin Butler is going to be a huge asset to the film. I'm excited to see both in the action scenes and also just the scenes between, him and the Baron, him and Stellan Skarsgård. Like that's such a, cool thing to think about. And also he does feature in scenes with several other major characters as well. So there's just gonna be a lot of fun interactions. I think that's the benefit of a part two, is because you establish these things, as Garin was saying, in the first one, you flesh out the world, you fill it with characters, and then in the second one you're introducing new characters. You're having characters that are interacting before that didn't interact in the first part. So lots of fun, I think, scenes, and there's a lot that can be, again, pulled apart and expanded more so than even what was on the page, with Frank Herbert.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to the contrast of a couple of months ago, like how the reaction was completely different. When Austin Butler was announced, a lot of people were like, "Who is that?" Or like maybe that was their least the least enthusiastic reaction that they were having to the new cast members, and that seems to have been reversed. Yeah, I have to say, like I'm really looking forward to see what he brings to the role. I'm still like also looking forward to Florence Pugh, just because like she is going to be part of the franchise potentially for a longer period of time. So really interested to see how she plays her role in this movie.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from the film Elvis, because I really, really liked it. Probably a movie I haven't enjoyed that much in quite a while. But I have to admit, though, that there were times when I was taken out of it because my mind was trying to imagine him as Feyd, not in an Elvis way, right? But he's very he was able to mimic Elvis's dance moves extremely well. I mean, he just nailed that, right? And so someone who is that coordinated and that artistic in his body movements, again, that's what you need for Feyd, right? He's a skilled, ruthless killer, and he is going to need to have that type of a body and that type of movement for that to be believable as Feyd-Rautha. So I did kind of zone out a couple of times and imagine him as Feyd, but for the most part, he was Elvis through and through, and I just loved it.
Part of the press release at that time, we also got a new synopsis for Dune Part 2. So I'll just read from that. This follow-up film will explore the mythic journey of Paul Atreides as he unites with Chani and the Fremen while on a warpath of revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the known universe, he endeavors to prevent a terrible future only he can foresee. So, Garin, going by what we know by the first movie and what we know of the original story, of course, do you feel that this does a good job in summing up like that second part of the book?
Yeah, for the most part. The line about having to choose between what is the love of his life or whatever that is, that's Chani, obviously. I don't know how much that is a critical piece in the overall grand scheme of the story, but I think that's a pretty decent summary. It didn't resonate with me the first time I read it, though. It felt a little forced, because I guess I'm so aware of the continuing story, right, in Messiah and Children and God Emperor. And so to me, I guess that's an accurate part 2 description or summary, but I guess I'm saying I didn't love it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think one of the parts there is obviously that they're putting more emphasis on the Zendaya and the role of Chani, which we know will be bigger in the movie than it is in the book. That's definitely one factor, but it does raise some questions because, yeah, he endeavors to prevent a terrible future that only he can foresee. Like, is it really something he can prevent or not?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the first press release came out and we got for part 1, and we got the synopsis with that, and that's the same synopsis we saw over and over again. It's on, same thing they put on like Fandango and AMC and all these other things, just giving a short summary of the movie. But it's not something where it's basically the same thing as that first part, where it's just you can't possibly encapsulate like the nuances of the Dune story, especially half of it, in just a brief synopsis. But they make it as kind of marketable as possible. And I think especially for part 2, you do kind of have to, I'm not sure how people are going to feel at the end of this movie, to be honest with you. I mean, we don't really know. We don't know how it's going to end as far as how it's depicted, or like what is the feeling they're going to try to leave us with walking out. Because for part 1, for example, I mean, it ends with them walking into the desert, and it's like, Paul's smiling. He's chosen to go with the Fremen. He's chosen Chani, and his vision has like come true of being with Chani in the desert. But then, you have Jessica watching, and just the look on her face is the most grim expression. And it really is like, there's like a burst of music and he's smiling walking off, but it's like it's really actually pretty dark. And like I feel like part 1, it's supposed to be like, well, for people that don't really know, like this is a triumphant, like let's go on to part 2 kind of feeling, but it is supposed to be like a darker, I think, kind of vibe to it. So I'm very curious to see how the end of part 2, like what that looks like, because we've already seen the visions of the jihad, and we know what Paul knows, or at least what he's seen or what he thinks he knows. So how far do you go into that, or how much do you like lean into the fact that he's going to be complicit in these things, and that he's being selfish and choosing this route, and that's going to result in catastrophe? It's going to be pretty interesting. I'm really excited to see that, especially with regards to more visions, presumably. I think they're going to expand that even more, especially with Water of Life and things like that. We'll see how that's depicted, or how much they go into that. But that's one thing I'm like, I love movie endings, are so important. I think that's the most important part of the movie. Even if you start out not great, if the opening isn't great or super gripping, I think if you end on a strong note, people feel better, walking out of the theater. They feel like they arrived at a good, satisfying conclusion. So I think that's going to be really, and Villeneuve, of course, always has beginning to end. He's fantastic, but his endings, I think, always resonate with me. So that's going to be really interesting. And I think this synopsis kind of, it puts it in as plain of terms as possible. And maybe it's a little too like poppy in some ways, but I think it's going to be, I don't know, maybe they're just trying to, make it not be so sour if and when it goes that route, potentially.
Yeah, and of course, we know from the tent scene in book 1 that Villeneuve is definitely not shying away from like the darker sides of what's to come. So like I'm sure that he's going to continue to explore that in the second movie, and that we will get that, a clear idea of what the direction that's going, especially knowing that his ambition is to continue with Dune Messiah.
Just having watched part 1 the other day, it's almost like the director has the ability to see the story in a timeline, as it were, and the director chooses to kind of amplify certain parts of that progress of the story along a timeline. And I found it really interesting that what Villeneuve has done is by starting, and I actually really thought it was genius to open with part one the way he did, where it's from Chani's perspective. It's very clear what the Harkonnens are there for. It's very clear what spice is, the planet. I thought that was brilliantly done. But it grabs your attention really fast. I mean, you're in it. You care about Chani and you don't even know who she is yet. And then to end the way the ending was, which you just described so well a minute ago, Chani, it's interesting the parts of the story that he amplified. And so looking at part two, it will be interesting to see, because I would bet good money that this is going to start with something gripping. It's gonna pull us right in. It's going to introduce some novel elements, perhaps characters right off the bat. But like both of you have said, how do you end this? Because Frank Herbert ends it with a conversation between Chani and Jessica, and it's about history will remember us as wives, right? It's not some sort of epic, intensive visual, right? But because Villeneuve is such a visual artist, I believe it will. So I believe this will have an incredibly climactic ending, and what elements he will amplify to create that is what I'm most excited about.
Just throwing this out there, I know we're on a bit of a tangent, but hey, why not? I always envision the end. I've thought this for years, just because I've read the book a few years ago now, and I've always been like a big movie guy. But the ending of part two, I feel like should be similar to like the ending of The Godfather, if that makes sense. Because at the end of The Godfather, and Villeneuve, mind you, has directly compared Michael Corleone with Paul Atreides, which I think is an interesting comparison. But I think, at the end of The Godfather, Michael, he's talking to I can't remember the name of her character, but Diane Keaton's character, and they're just talking about, well, I didn't actually do this, I didn't do that, I didn't order these people to be killed, I'm not responsible for this. And then she's convinced in that moment that, okay, everything's going to be fine, and she goes to like pour the drinks in the other room, and then he's still in the office, and then he's surrounded by the the crime syndicate, and then just through the doorway, that separation and the way it's framed, and the guy comes in and kisses the ring, and then the door's closed off, and like really just severs that relationship in a lot of ways, even though she's in part two of The Godfather. I just think something along those lines, like it doesn't even have to be like grand necessarily, but something just very like that makes for like a great like metaphor, or like some sort of analogy where Paul has a strong relationship with Chani and his mother. I think you see something almost similar to that in the end of part one, where he has this relationship with Jessica we've seen throughout the film, but now he's kind of going off on his own. He's with the Fremen, he's with Chani. I think almost something similar to that, where maybe we spend this whole movie between seeing this relationship build between Chani and Paul, but now, okay, he's unleashed something and he's going to become something, this like godhead essentially, that is just that he's almost going to be like inhuman trying to deal with him. So I think that would be really cool, and just seeing the Fremen like kind of captured in like some way that they just kind of engulf Paul, and it's just it's like this big wave is like that's kind of made her this fire, as it's referred to in the book. I think there's just so many cool different ways they could go, and I feel like, as Garin, Garin's like, I don't really care for the synopsis, and he's right. Like none of this, what I'm talking about, is captured in that synopsis really, but I think that's what makes it so interesting. Like I'm very curious to see the marketing and how people receive the ending, what ending they kind of go with. I think we can kind of start to feel these things out just through this tiny piece of marketing, really, which is essentially what it is.
Yeah, that is a really interesting comparison, because at this point, to those fans of part one who haven't read the book and don't know what happens to Paul, at least like my wife and my kids and others that I'm close to, they like Paul Atreides. They care about him. He is the protagonist, right? They realize that these visions could be true, but the way Villeneuve tells the story, it establishes that his visions are not always accurate, right? So is he really going to be this overlord that creates millions of deaths throughout the universe? Like, they don't know that, right? So it'll be interesting to see how Villeneuve handles that, because in all the Marvel films, I mean, everything in our popular culture today is all about sort of these heroes that, you know, just conquer the evil and kick butt and take names and all that business. But this is different. This is a very different type of a character arc. And yet, how will he handle that in a way that we understand what's happening to Paul? We understand he's making the choices he is. This is a really complex thing to handle. And you've got, you know, the Herbert estate involved. They're not going to want this to go, you know, off the reservation. And I think they really trust Villeneuve, as we all do at this point. But you've got to stay true to what Frank Herbert was trying to communicate through this character, Paul Atreides. It's not Star Wars. It's not a Marvel film in the context of the hero. So, like you were saying, Johnny, I just think there's a number of ways you could do this, but you also don't want the Paul Atreides character to just go completely like off the reservation either. You know, you don't want it to be like, oh my gosh, what's happened to this guy? You know, it's got to progress in a way that you're like, okay, I understand why he's making these choices, and you know, the pressure he's under, and then the opposition from the emperor, who is really pulling all of the strings here. So yeah, it's just fascinating how you could take this story in so many different directions. I just want to know.
I'm thinking it's hard to compare television to film, especially we only have one film versus multiple seasons of television. But I'm thinking of like Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones. Like, she was a character that was loved, and people like loved following her arc, and you knew there was always a chance that she could potentially go bad. But when she did go bad ultimately at the end of Game of Thrones, sorry for the spoiler alert, but like people had a visceral reaction to that, and it was not necessarily a good one. Like, it was more so like, well, she can go bad, but we need to believe it, or we need to make sure that it's justified, or that everything makes sense. I think that's the careful line you have to walk. So just making it logical and making sure that all the pieces are there. I think that's part two's biggest task, I would say. They've set a great foundation with part one, of course, but I think that's going to be the key. And I think ultimately what I'm hearing is that we don't want actual Messiah Paul Atreides to bring the reins to Arrakis at the end of this movie, I think is the sentiment here.
No rain, please. At the very end.
No rain.
Yeah, I think we can all sign up for that. No rain in this movie.
Having just read the very last chapter or section of the Dune novel, it does describe in there that Paul, either he says it or he thinks it, I can't remember, that the face of Arrakis will change, right? Because of what he's done and put the emperor in his rightful place, he will change the face of Arrakis. So I get why they did that. It was a cop-out, right? I know, David Lynch didn't want that. I get it. But, I just want to defend the fact that that is an element in the story, but it doesn't rain, right? It changes the face of the planet.
Yeah. And then there's been some other news on terms of shooting locations. So like the first movie, Dune Part 2 will be heading to Abu Dhabi, specifically to film scenes in the Liwa Desert. And the movie is scheduled to shoot there for 3 weeks this fall. So obviously they wouldn't want to do that during the summer, but so it's good to know that. Johnny, we've already talked at length about like how the production of the first movie made, excellent use of practical sets. How big of a deal is it knowing that this movie has at least 3 weeks of filming in the desert?
So yes, to your point, and I think Marcus can correct me if you may have seen something else or read more, but I think in the tweet for like the Abu Dhabi or like UAE film industry, they said that it would be at like 5 weeks in Abu Dhabi for that, which is even more extensive, and definitely far more extensive than 11 days is what they did for part one. So we're talking like 3 weeks more essentially, at least. And that says a lot. I think when I tweeted about that, people were pretty excited by that prospect that we are going to see significant, not just time in the desert, but big action sequences potentially, because we know, book readers at least, that in the back half there is pretty significant things that happen in the desert with skirmishes, battles, worm related things. So that I think is very enticing. I can just imagine, we saw in part one how they had the practical ornithopters out in the desert and they had them up on the cranes, and I'm just imagining them with like a segment of a giant worm like out in the desert, hauled out there and sitting on top of it or something. So I'm expecting significant action. I'm expecting significant spectacle, and I think there's going to be all that time I think that they're going to spend out there. There's more scenes in the desert that they have to film, I think, generally speaking, but I think they're also going to be just larger in like scope, and I think that there's going to be, we saw in the vision from part one, we've been talking about visions. There is that, moment of Muad'Dib teaching the Sardaukar, their lesson on the plains. So I think we'll see, that image in the first film was pretty much entirely CG for the most part. It was kind of painted in with, the stunt performers and everything, motion capture. But I think that in this one, we're going to have, people are going to be out there in the desert wearing suits and armor and things like that. And they're going to have real weapons. And I think that's going to be a really fun kind of change from what we saw in the first movie. Whether it'll be a close contest in some of these battles, that remains to be seen. But I think it definitely sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think people are definitely looking forward to more desert, more fighting, more worms, especially.
There hasn't been any specific mention of how long they're going to spend in Jordan, because I know that there was some communication that they were going to return there, but I don't think that has been officially mentioned how long they're going to spend there. So that definitely like a big amount of time in the desert overall.
Yeah, I think you've got the iconic scene, obviously, of Paul learning to ride a worm, which is, that's got to be done really well, so there's no strange weirdness to that. I love that he's already established the shot with Liat Kynes, where shortly before she gets taken out, she widens her arms and she has the maker hooks that come out, and to those of us that know the story, we know exactly what she was about to do right there. But then, she was attacked, and that was, I thought that was also handled very well. And we've talked about that on the show before, but how to handle the worm riding and establishing all that is going to be really, really important. And that will lead the audience into, okay, this is what Leto meant by desert power, right? And he's got to kind of build that for the audience to understand that. So yeah, I guess, as you were saying, Johnny, I'm not surprised that it's that many weeks in the desert, because so much of this, you've got sieges going on and interaction there. There's just a lot, going on. And so that's exciting.
Speaking of the worm part of it, you mentioned the writing definitely has to be done well, and I'm super curious to see like how they approach that and film it. I'm just thinking like the impression these worms are going to make in part two versus the first, because we don't see them a lot in the first one, to be honest. I mean, there's that really one famous shot where him being Paul and Jessica are like face to face with the worm, and it kind of rises up. And it's huge because you can see it tower over the two of them. But I think that worm in particular is going to be like a maggot compared to what he's going to end up calling, the big one. And I think my head canon, I'm already established that the worm that eats the harvester in part one is going to be the one that he ends up calling at during part two, and he's going to ride it. So I really can't wait to see, just because they're going to expand on that a lot. I think those creatures, and I think that's going to be a really cool part of it. And I did a tweet a little while back where I said, this is during Oscar season, I think, I just said that, I'm bummed out that I feel like we're gonna have so few ornithopters in part two versus part one, but we're gonna have a lot more worms. And Joe Walker liked that tweet, so I'm thinking we're in pretty good shape with the worm count, or the worm action, at least in this movie.
That's great. A little Joe Walker confirmation on that. That's good. That's good enough for me.
So the last part of Dune movie news we had is relating to the casting. So we are still getting cast news. Of course, the major roles have been filled. We're still waiting for a confirmation on who is going to play Count Fenring. So hopefully that's still to come soon. But in the meantime, we're continuing to get some information on some of the smaller roles as well. So we had a confirmation that Souheila Yacoub is joining Dune Part 2 as Shish Hakli, and that's a Fremen Fedaykin, a squad leader. And in the book, she plays the important part that she basically hands the maker hooks to Paul Atreides when he's going to do his tests and ride the worm. And I can imagine that in the movie, they're going to make us want to feel more about the Fremen and get more familiar with some of the other characters besides Stilgar and Chani. So I can imagine her having more scenes in the book as well. So yeah, Johnny, do you know anything about her from previous roles?
Yeah, so I haven't seen her in anything. She has, I can't remember, I believe it was Justin Kroll, the Deadline film reporter, but he mentioned that like 3 of her last few films have been like at Cannes Film Festival or something, or like a combination of festivals like Berlin and some others. And she's also, I think she was in a pretty popular Netflix series as well, like a French Netflix series. And Gaspar Noé's Climax, which came out, I believe it was in the last couple of years, she was in that too. So I haven't seen her perform. Obviously, as you mentioned, the role is going to be a little bit on the smaller side. Of course, we have no idea how that's going to be expanded from the book. It sounds like when I saw the news, I was like, oh, cool. Like, well, because I saw her photo and I saw her name and I was like, I'm very excited that they have someone that has, kind of Mina connections or like Mina descent and heritage. I thought that was nice to see. And I suspect other Fremen roles will also be filled out. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of Fremen in this movie, which is going to be awesome. And I suspect that we're not going to get every single name on the casting list prior to the movie coming out for all those characters. But I thought that was cool, but I did not, the name of the character did not immediately like come to my mind. And so when I looked it up and saw that, yeah, that was the Fremen that handed him the hooks and that it was a warrior, like one of the Fedaykin, I thought that was pretty exciting. I can't wait, because just being reminded that Paul does have these kind of, as they say in the book, like the death commandos that go out and perform these missions. Really excited to see how they capture some of that in the film. That should make for some fun action. But just knowing that they're going to highlight particular Fremen characters outside of just, as you mentioned, the main 2, like Stilgar and Chani, which is mostly what we've been connected to so far is like the audience. But I think even in part 1, they did a good job, establishing like Jamis, for example. I thought that was really well done. So if they can do something similar to that for a couple other, Fremen characters, and like just having someone appear in like multiple scenes, like talk to Paul and kind of walk alongside him like throughout the movie, I think, his journey, I think that would be important. This seems to be one of the roles that they've selected. And I also think it was in the book, it was a male character. And so I think that all has also been changed. So that's good too, because as probably, I think John Spates was one of the folks that mentioned like earlier on when they ultimately decided to, make Liet Kynes a woman, that they were like, well, how can we fill in some other like roles, for women versus kind of what it is on the page. So I think it's all good signs, and I'm curious to see, how she does in the role. And I'm also curious, like I said earlier, to see how the other Fremen characters, what other Fremen characters are highlighted and who ends up playing those roles too.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see the same way there was some gender swapping in the characters, and also there was some elevation or expansion of some of the characters of part 1. I'm kind of excited to see what Villeneuve is going to do with some of these characters who, I'm grateful that he's having this particular character we've talked about here as someone who is a very experienced actress who could do a lot with this and elevate it and expand it. But he may do that with some other characters as well. And so he's got kind of a lot of freedom to do that, but I know he's trying to also stay true to the fan base who knows the story so well. So one thought I just wanted to add on to this. Sorry to take a little bit of a tangent here off of this character we're talking about. I'm interested to see, because in part one, the Baron has been elevated to this position of the ultimate evil, and he is the antagonist with a capital A. But in part two, it really is the Emperor, and the way it is on the page, you know, the Baron doesn't have that kind of gravitas that he does in the first part of the book. So it'll be interesting to see how he balances that, how the writers have balanced that to not throw away what's been established with a character like the Baron, but also to make sure that the Emperor's you know, omnipotence and ruthlessness is also very clear to the audience. So you know, I'm excited to see how certain characters are expanded and maybe certain characters are minimized, perhaps.
Okay, let's get into a little bit of expanded news.
The Duniverse, books, comics, games, collectibles, and more.
This is the segment where we talk about everything else happening in the world of Dune, and we have just a couple of news bites today. So first up, one gaming announcement. CMON Games has revealed Dune, War for Arrakis. That's going to be a new strategy board game, and that's actually going to come to Kickstarter later this year. So we don't have exact timelines from them. What we do know is that this comes from the same design team behind War of the Ring, which was really popular Lord of the Rings strategy board game. So they're well-known players in the gaming industry. So then we had actually some news on the collectibles and toy side. So Super 7, they announced their first wave of Dune ReAction Figures. And so these are actually going all the way back to the 80s. So like a really retro look based on the 1984 Dune film by David Lynch. And the figures have already been released. So this was announced, and literally like 1 week later, we know that Simon already got his hands on some of the figures. And so we'll wait till he's back next time to really talk and get his full impressions about that. So you can look forward to that on the next time. So that's a wrap for this week. So let's go ahead and sign off.
Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us and watching and supporting us again. It's always fun to join in. Miss Simon this time around, buddy, but I'm glad we got to still get connected and go over, because the last couple of weeks have been really fun, and just the buzz building back up has been pretty neat to see online and whatnot. And yeah, as Garin said earlier, just thinking every day, like, what are they doing over there? What are those sets looking like? What are the costumes looking like? What scene are they filming today or tomorrow? So that's part of the fun, and I can't wait. Fingers crossed, maybe we'll get some little tidbits here and there over the next 4 months or so. I'm expecting that to be like the production timeline. So not gonna get greedy, but I'm really excited just to see. I'm sure we'll hear things at least here and there, or see posts on social media for maybe some cast and crew and things like that. There's usually slip through the cracks. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and you can find me at Johnny Sobchak as always on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I really just love speculating with the crew here, and I get excited about, you know, what could be, and I like all the thoughts that we're sharing, and glad you're here with us for that. And I really do hope that, unlike part one, they really do release kind of a lot more of the production stills and other news from the production front, just because there is not only the original fan base, but now there's kind of a new fan base of people that really worldwide have fallen in love with this new franchise. So yeah, again, this is Garin. You can find me on Twitter at Dune Companion, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, this is Marcus Gabriel. So you can find me writing at dunewsnet.com, and find me on Twitter and Instagram at dunewsnet. Yeah, and it does seem that it has been a bit of an awakening, right? Like we had a movie that came out last year, and now, you know, people see that it's really happening. Like Dune Part 2 is filming as we speak. So it's a really exciting time to be a Dune fan. So yeah, we're all here for it, and looking forward to share the upcoming news with you, and discuss a lot more releases on the other side, whether it's the books, TV series, and other stuff that we're going to get more news on in the near future. So until next time, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.